Hi, my name is James Andrella, and you are listening to the Back to Human podcast. On today's episode, I have returning guest and good friend, Dr. Christiana Marron. Dr. Marron runs her own private one-on-one physical therapy practice in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Dr. Marron has many tools in her arsenal, such as cupping, dry needling, rock tape, Graston Technique, among many others. And she offers a service that you won't find in your typical insurance-based physical therapy offices. If you are in the South Florida area and have been dealing with some chronic pain that hasn't subsided, no matter what you do, I highly recommend that you pay her a visit. Without further ado, Dr. Marron, welcome back to the show.
James, thank you so much for having me again. I'm actually very excited about this one.
Always a pleasure. So today we are going to be discussing lymph and the lymphatic system, something that oftentimes gets overlooked, something that I've heard referred to in the past by Dr. Perry Nicholson, I believe that's his name, as the Cinderella system, because people will look over here, over there, and they absolutely just ignore the system. Meanwhile, I feel like a lot of, not every problem, but some problems can be resolved by addressing lymph and stagnant lymph. So what is lymph exactly, and what is the lymphatic system?
So just briefly too, a lot of what I've learned is actually from Dr. Perry Nicholson. I've taken a good chunk of his classes and his courses, and they are like world changing. You know what I mean? Especially as a practitioner that is one-on-one and spends a lot of time with her clientele. He puts it in a really good way too in the very beginning, and I'm sure he says it on some of his podcasts too. He says the lymphatic system is this system that it's like every medical practitioner forgot about. And even when you talk about anatomy books, and I go back to even when I was in school, we look at it and they have the muscle, they have the nerve, they have the artery, they have the vein, and then they have nothing. Where's the lymphatic system, right? And then some of these pictures and diagrams show it as these green lines in the body with these nodules. And they don't really talk about it. They kind of just point to it and they're like, hey, this is the lymphatic system. Lymph is not green, by the way. And that's it. There's nothing that's really spoken on about it. But to answer your question, lymph specifically is clear. It's more water than anything, but it's made up of white blood cells primarily. And they attack bacteria, viruses, anything toxic in our body. Those cells are going to kind of eat them, right? They're made of lymphocytes primarily. And the lymph runs through the lymphatic system. Now, the lymphatic system, I would say 70 to 80% of it is found about 2 inches above your navel. And it's really around the liver and the stomach, right? That's why they say the lymphatic system is kind of a big part of your gut. And we can go back and touch upon that in a little bit. The other big portion of it is around your clavicle and into the armpits, right? Those axillary nodes, where a lot of, when you talk about breast cancer patients and stuff like that, they always say, oh, the lymph nodes are affected. And we can always talk about that later on too. And then another good chunk of it is under our skin. And that's a big missing piece, I think, for a lot of people too, because we don't realize that our skin is one of the biggest organs in our body. And it's a lot of those lymph nodes are found underneath the skin, right? And so what happens is the lymphatic system has a deep connection with our circulatory system, our cardiovascular system. So it almost traces the cardiovascular system, or we could say vice versa, right? If we wanted to. And so lymph moves by movement, by the pumping mechanism. And it's the same thing as our circulatory system. So, our blood gets shot out of our heart, it comes out into your subclavian, and then it runs all the way down our legs. And what happens when we see people that have poor cardiovascular health? They have swollen legs. They have these big edematous legs and calves, right? And the problem is they're not getting a pumping mechanism back to their heart. And then the same thing for, the lymph. A lot of times that swelling is going to occur because you have this buildup of metabolic waste. And what happens is those lymph nodes, and I'll break this down even more in a little bit, can't get that metabolic waste out. And that's usually later on, right? There's usually a lot more that happens before that even gets stagnant. So the lymphatic system is a lot of our immune system. So it's going to help us when we have a virus or bacteria infection or something that's toxic that enters our system. The lymphatic system is going to help and try and take that out.
So it'd be safe to assume if someone has poor circulation, then they have poor lymph movement as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And you mentioned that the majority or a lot of the lymph system is located around the liver or around your internal organs. And I've heard that the lymph doesn't really have a pump. I believe that there's two different main pumps. It would be the calves and also your diaphragm. So this is why diaphragmatic breathing would be so important.
Right. And so think about it. If 70 to 80% of our lymphatic system is sitting right, again, 2 inches above our navel, right? What is right there? Our diaphragm. So a lot of that pumping mechanism is through breathing. And, you know, I know you have some questions about like ways we can talk about helping our lymphatic system, but that diaphragm is very, very key to helping that pumping mechanism to get those lymph nodes to get pumped. And it's just like, you know, if we move better, we poop better. If we, you know, move more, we sweat more, we get toxins out. So everything in our body is a pumping mechanism. It's all about pressures. And so when we have a quote unquote sick body, right, you'll see people that are puffy, you'll see people that are swollen, you'll see rashes, you'll see psoriasis, you'll see, you know, all these other ailments, let's talk about. And I'll go even into more detail about like the physical therapy aspect and the stuff I see. But you can see a person, you can just say like, I know that they're definitely not having, you know, a good time with the inside of their body, whether they don't poop or they have diarrhea or, you know, they just look unhealthy to begin with because the lymphatic system is not moving. There's no pumping mechanism to get that lymph out. So let's say a virus enters the body and the system is sick to begin with, okay? And it gets stuck and it gets sent to a lymph node. And that lymph node, you know, is like, oh, we have this pathogen, we need to attack it. And it's got to trigger all the other lymph nodes to help attack that virus or whatever it is, bacteria. If it's not moving, it's just like anything else, like traffic, right? If it's not moving, nothing's going. So that's where like not moving your body and not having a filtration system for yourself leads to all these ailments that a lot of people have. And again, when you talk about like someone even who just has pain all over their body and they're like, I don't know, like I wake up one morning and my knee hurts and my shoulder hurts and then it just moves all over the place and they can never be satisfied with like one thing. They're always like, oh, it's always moving. A lot of times that's like the last thing or even a, you know, a pre-existing thing to even something worse, because most of the time at that point, they're already toxic. They already have a bunch of other things going on in there and that lymphatic system is just not moving. And so that pump is super important.
And the pump gets distorted. Well, if people are just stagnant, they're not really moving a lot, they're not really going to get that benefit. So it's going to be, the lymph is going to be stagnant. But then also I know through PRI, like the rib cage and the way that that's situated based off of like footwear or just people sitting and their body adapting in these patterns, most people are not going to be breathing with their diaphragm. They're going to be breathing with their accessory breathing muscles. They're going to be breathing with their neck, their scalenes, their pecs, their upper chest. So it's not really possible for them to get the lymph moving around their internal organs, at least if they are in these patterns. And one of the things that I did a few years ago, I was working with a group of people. I read a book called Isometric Power Revolution. I believe that's what it's called. And in one of the first chapters, he mentions that there's this breathing technique where you just lay flat on the ground and you work some visualization process with this as well. And you take a maximal inhale and you hold that for 7 seconds. And then you do a maximal exhale. You're filling up your belly to begin with. So belly, then you're going to feel your ribs expand, but you're holding this and then you're exhaling absolutely everything as if you're blowing up a balloon, similar to what PRI uses. And then you're holding that as well. And I adopted this into my training, what I noticed is that I was getting very, very fast, expedited results with people. And their swelling looked like it kind of just diminished. And I couldn't really attribute it to necessarily one thing. I mean, the training was good. I will give myself a pat on the back for that one. But beyond like the nutrition and everything that was going on, I wasn't doing too much different than what the other coaches were doing in the gym. But it was like everyone that's doing this is seeing really, really good results. Now, I don't believe that practice would probably be safe for everyone now in hindsight. But I did notice that it worked, and I guess it was due, now I realize, to this pumping mechanism. So with this, where does the lymph go? Where does it exit?
Well, it exits out in so many different ways, like we talked about. So, when we talk about the digestive system and how many lymph nodes are around our gut, right? That a lot of that stuff is excreted through our poop, our pee, our sweat, that excretes out of how lymph gets out. Now, if you talk about people who have, let's say, like a leaky gut, right? A lot of people like to use the leaky gut thing, or the IBS or whatever. I mean, a leaky gut means that when it comes to our intestines, we need some absorption to occur, right? We need to take and pull nutrients from the gut and allow it to go into our cells and let them do their job. Cells also need to regenerate every day. So a lot of times there's a backup of metabolic waste if there is a very toxic system. So if, let's say, the lymphatic system gets backed up because there's not a lot of movement, right? Or there's no pumping mechanism to get this stuff out, this increase in toxicity or this increase in metabolic waste then causes the gut to then have these like perforated holes, right? So now the metabolic waste is not getting filtrated out of our system. It's getting dumped back into our system. So a lot of our lymph has to get, taken out of our body in some sort of way, whether it's, again, our urine, our poop, or our, sweat through our skin. I think people think when like we get a massage or something like that, it'll go and then just like float everywhere in our body, but that's not the reality of it. The reality of it is it gets pumped through all the nodes in the lymphatic system, and then it gets absorbed back into, let's say, our gut, and then it follows out through our excretion. Because you have to remember, it gets pumped into the heart, into our blood, and then our body utilizes it to excrete the nutrients from it and take that cellular waste of the stuff that when the cell dies and it doesn't need it anymore, that metabolic waste has to get absorbed back into the body some way, and then it's got to get excreted. Think about the liver even, right? The liver is so important. So if we have a liver that's not able to filtrate a lot of this stuff out, right, we're going to see this increase in metabolic waste all over our body. So the better you poop, the more often you pee, the more that you sweat, that means you have a really good mechanism to excrete a lot of these toxins in the lymph.
What you were saying there, it kind of reminds me, I've heard of people that are really overweight, that they just jump into exercise and they actually have a worse time. So they may be losing weight, or maybe not even, but actually jumping straight into like a CrossFit workout, if you're morbidly obese, may not be the best idea, because you have all this toxic load, and to try to get it all out at once may not really work out in your favor.
You have to, okay, so here's another, I think, very layman's way of looking at the lymphatic system is you've heard of this, the fish tank, example. You have a fish tank, you have a filtration system, right? And that fish tank gets really dirty. And you're like, darn, I got to clean this thing out. So you spend time, clean the fish tank out, you put, clean all the things, you put everything back in, fill it back up with water, and then it gets dirty again. You're like, what the hell? I just cleaned this. Well, if you don't take care of the filtration system, you're still going to have a dirty tank. Does that make sense? So people who are either super inflamed, leaky gut, poor nutrition, inflamed, whatever, just a toxic inside person, you're going to see that they have a lot of other steps they have to do before they can just like, oh yeah, let me take this supplement. Oh yeah, let me add this. Let me do that. You have to literally detox first before you can add stuff. So, that being said, like I've had patients who are like, well, I'm just going to go for a lot of lymphatic massages because it helps. That's great. It does, because even self-lymphatic massage helps. But if you're a very toxic person who doesn't go to the bathroom regularly, who doesn't do X, Y, and Z and all these other things, or takes care of their nutrition or just eats like shit, you're going to maybe reap the benefit of that lymphatic massage for an hour or so. And then you're going to find yourself feeling like crap again because you're not taking care of that filtration system first. So there's a lot of steps you need to take first, I would say, if you are finding yourself that you're very unhealthy, or you're having a lot of these, IBS symptoms, gut systems, inflamed pain all over the body, stiffness all over the body, right? Because what are some other, physical factors that come around with this, which I deal with all the time, is poor healing, slow healing. They'll say a big complaints like, oh, but I wake up every morning and my back is so stiff and I feel like I'm 90. Well, like I have an 80-year-old, and this, Tom, he wakes up and he does not say that. The man moves 24/7, right? And your age doesn't mean you have to wake up feeling like you're stiff or old or anything like that. If you move better, you're going to feel better. And that's how the lymphatic system works. If I move more, just moving alone, just walking, it doesn't need to be crazy. If you have an if you're a coach and you have a very morbidly obese patient, sometimes just getting them to walk daily, or just if they have a job where they're sitting a lot of the time, making sure that they take breaks where they're walking as much as they can, is going to start just the process alone, not just the cardiovascular aspect, but when you talk about lymphatics, you're going to start getting stuff to start moving. And they might even say, I'm pooping better, or I'm sleeping better. I'm not waking up in the morning and I'm feeling like I'm 90 years old because I'm stiff all the time. A lot of my patients that are super stiff or not mobile, super inflamed. Just super inflamed. But a lot of those people don't want to take the time to dig into the other stuff. And that's where I say sometimes we can only do so much. Like, yeah, we can work on their lymph and show them how to take care of their lymph and massage and dry brushing, and we can dive into that a little bit more. But if we're not getting rid of the toxic stuff first, we can't just add more to the soup. We can't. It's just not going to work like that.
One of my favorite quotes, and I really don't know who to attribute this to, is you can't build a garden in a swamp. So you got to change the internal environment before you can actually build something that's going to be sustainable. And I do want to get into the dry brushing. So what would be some techniques? Because from my experience and what I've learned from Perry Nicholson is that you don't really want to go too rough. So if someone's inflamed, if they're swollen, and I'm curious now with like stuff like foam rolling and how certain areas will be extremely painful. Would that be attributed to the lymph, and then just going even harder is going to make things worse? You want to go low and slow, no?
Correct. You want to make it super simple. So Dr. Perry likes to talk about this mountain, like the rain starts on the top of the mountain and then trickles down, right? So if you talk about like self-lymphatic releasing, he always wants you to start like above and below the clavicle. And he literally says it's like the lightest pressure, and you massage above and below the clavicle. And it could be like 15, 30 seconds. It's nothing crazy. And I'm not like digging, right? And a lot of people who are inflamed, just doing that alone is going to be like, oh, that's why like some people just immediately get on a foam roller and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't. Like there's no way. And that's a big indicator that that's going to be too much for them. And like you said, they might have that adverse reaction where they're like, oh my gosh, no, like this is too much. Like you said, the morbidly obese patient jumping into CrossFit activity, it's too much. It's too much of a shock to the system. So start smaller. So he talks about those 6 points. So he talks about above and below the clavicle. Then he talks about going behind the ear where your mastoid process is, right? Going through there. And then following that into the neck, all the way through, like behind the SCM where the SCM dumps. And then he talks about going into the shoulder. So the 6 points, like right between like where you're like almost where everyone complains of shoulder pain, where like your bicep tendon runs into where the pec attaches. So if you're just moving your arm, up and down, you can kind of find that crease. And again, that's going to be super tender on someone who has a lymphatic blockage. Like I can go in here and I'm just rubbing, I'm digging, right? And I can like get in there with no issue. If I do this to some patients, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, like I put my 2 fingers on them and there's zero pressure and they're like, jumping off the table. Then the other one is going above the belly button, right above the navel, and then working your way right down toward the groin. And you can kind of go out almost like when a pregnant woman is having a breached baby, you always talk about the ring ligament that comes out. So you kind of like make it almost like a peace sign, and you kind of massage all the way like a V down to the groin. And then the last point, the biggest important point, is behind the knee, because that is there's very easy access to your lymphatic system behind the knee. And I think that some people do a disservice when they have knee pain, that people always, and I've done this with you before, you focus on the back side of the knee first if you have a swollen knee. Even though the swelling's in the front of it, you focus on the back because a lot of your lymphatics are right there. So why do people have swollen knees or knee pain a lot of times? Well, if they're sitting a lot and, the back of the knee's on the chair, or, it's pressed and compressed and it's shortened, there's so much lymph that gets blocked there. Now, if it gets blocked, that's where we find tightness, we find pain, we find maybe puffiness, we find, joint pain or lack of movement or anything like that. That's where we're going to try and focus on those areas. So those 6 points are kind of where Dr. Perry talks about needs to be the main focus. And you want to do it in that order, because he says that if you were to do it in a reverse pattern, you're going to cause an uptake of all that waste material. So you don't want to do it like my knee and then my groin. You want to, like he said, that mountaintop rain coming down. I want it to come down. And that way, when you talk about your cardiovascular system, now your veins that are going to pump all that metabolic waste is going to go down, and it's going to go up back towards your heart. Does that make sense? Because remember, the lymph follows the cardiovascular system.
So with those 6 points, would those be like the main areas that get congested?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And so go ahead.
I know there's like a lot around the clavicles. Like you'd be surprised just what that little touch can do. And people that are just jumping into like their health journey, they're going to assume that, I need to go balls to the wall, and that doing this small little brushing isn't going to do it, because it doesn't really feel like much, but it's really effective.
Right. And honestly, if you have someone that's maybe not toxic or not very, inflamed, they might be like, yeah, dude, I could do this all day. And it's like, okay, well, you don't have that issue. It's not a bad thing to do, though, from time to time, to get that stuff moving, And like I said, what is the most common thing with like back pain patients when they come into my office? Oh, like the morning time is the worst, because I can't move. My back is so stiff. I feel like I'm 90 years old. Like every joint hurts. But then once I get moving, I feel better. And it's like, that's why. Yeah. And then he talks a little bit even more. He's been doing more research on the lymph that goes into the brain. We could have a whole nother conversation about that, but you talk about brain fog, right? A lot of people talk about this brain fog too. And we're adapting, and we're seeing that a lot of the lymph nodes go up into the brain as well. So if you have a congested system, the whole thing's backed up. So not only will you feel inflamed, have pain somewhere around your body or all over the body, psoriasis, skin rashes, whatever, a lot of times those people are also going to be dealing with brain fog. Why? Because the lymph is going to get stuck up there as well. Now, when we go to bed at night, we don't move, right? There's no motion. So that's where like people end up having like this stiffness all over their body, or like they wake up and, their brain fog. Now we could talk about, cortisol levels and all that other stuff that plays a role, but, keeping it just to lymphatics, that stuff's not moving. And at nighttime, what happens? We recover. We're supposed to detox in the middle of the night. We're supposed to have that recovery aspect. Why sleep is so important. So if we have a toxic system that can't, kind of unfuck itself, right? We're going to end up waking up in the morning feeling like crap. And then what's your go-to? I'm going to go get grab my cup of coffee, and I'm going to get my caffeine in, and it just goes and goes and goes.
Yeah. It's like you're running on E the whole time. Would
Yes.
the lymph in your brain, would that be considered a lymphatic system? Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yes. Yes.
So let's say you go through that whole routine, but you actually have like a blockage or some lymph node is swollen, or you may not even have lymph nodes because someone removed them. How does that affect the rest of the lymphatic system, and how can you get past that block?
So let's talk about breast cancer just because that's very dear and true to my heart. So one of the symptoms I had when I got diagnosed, or what sent me to the hospital first, right? I was sitting in class. So for all your listeners, I went through breast cancer back in 2014. I was getting ready for a physique competition in bodybuilding. I was 3 weeks out from a show, so I was on Team No Sleep, which is not smart. I was on, Anavar. I was taking steroids. I was eating literally under 1,000 calories a day, just burning my candle at both ends of the stick. I was sitting in class and I was wearing this like Nike dry fit shirt. And all of a sudden, I thought my hand was growing like twice the size it was. And I was like looking at my hand and I'm like in class and it felt like I had someone had like, a tourniquet around my arm.
Mhm.
So I looked at my buddy AJ and I like tapped him and I was like, yo, look at my hand, dude. And he's like, what the hell? He's like, did you get bit by something? I'm like, I don't know, but it's like I literally thought my hand was like Eddie Murphy's hand in The Nutty Professor. Like it was just like about to explode out of my skin. So I raised my hand. My teacher was like, oh, you should go to the clinic. I was like, okay. The clinic had no answers for me. Great. Go to the ER. Go to the ER. I spent 6 days there. They had no answers, nothing. Ran me through 1,001 tests. Chris was beyond pissed. They kept trying to do all this other stuff. And what they found was my white blood cell count was out of control. But even with my family history of, my grandmother having breast cancer, my sister had ovarian, like nobody checked that. And they kept blaming it on this like leaky bicuspid valve I've had in my heart for my whole life. So I was just like, I pretty much AMA'd because they were like, oh, if you leave the hospital, like it's against blah, blah, blah. So long story short, they wanted me to follow up with a cardiovascular specialist and I forgot who else. The lymph went down. My hand went back to normal. I think because I wasn't doing anything pretty much. And I was sleeping. So 2 months later, I feel like Chris feels a knot in my breast and it was tender and it hurt. And so I was like, okay. I said, I guess I'm going to go to my OB because I've never felt that. And I thought maybe I ripped something. I don't know. And then sure as hell, it went down the whole process that I had type 2A breast cancer and it had infiltrated 2 of my lymph nodes in my left axillary. So there's the lymphatic system talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was running on Team No Sleep. I was running on nothing. I was a toxic environment and my body was saying, hey, stupid, pay attention, right? So sometimes it's good that we get those signals because I think if we didn't, we wouldn't pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. But usually that's the last straw, right? It's not like your lymph node gets swollen first and then you're like, oh, I had all this other stuff primarily going on. It's usually like the later stages. It's the oh fuck stages, right? Mm-hmm. So that's when I was like, okay, learn more about lymphatics. So now when you talk about breast cancer specifically, just because it happens a lot, let's say they decide to, depending on the degree of whatever woman had a mastectomy and they took all her lymph nodes with it, right? She's going to go through a long recovery process of lymphatic physical therapy. And a lot of that entails wrapping your hand and your whole extremity with bandages in a certain way to allow the lymph to stop pooling into the arm. And they want to dump it back into the subclavian and then have it infiltrate throughout your system. But not a lot of people will say this. I read it from this book. It's called Surgery is the New Pill. And it's a surgeon who literally went against every like surgery, even gallbladder surgery. Like he goes off of like the deep end of, and which I love, of how he could refute why certain surgeries don't need to be done. Right? So if you take and remove out lymph nodes, it's just like almost taking out an organ. because it is an organ. So that means that whoever gets the lymph nodes taken out is going to have a hard time with either fighting viruses, fighting bacteria. If they go back to eating a really crappy diet, or they, go back to living in a very toxic way, they're going to have an even harder time trying to not be so sick. They're going to have an even harder time not, staying healthy or feeling as great, because they're missing a big chunk of that lymphatic system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you're definitely going to like next week's episode regarding breast cancer and breast cancer awareness. I know we've been talking about this behind the scenes, but I do like that book that you mentioned. So Surgery is the New Pill, because I do feel like people are really quick to jump the gun, and I'm glad that you mention it, because once someone is presented with the C word, right, we already said it, this is probably going to get censored. It is what it is. But like panic sets in, and you're like, just get it out, get it out, get it out. So it's good that we have people that are perceivably on our side that aren't just quick to cut you open and take this out, because I don't feel like we were really ever supposed to go inside the body. It creates scar tissue. That's going to lead to issues. The body's conductive. We talked about this in the acupuncture episode as well. So say they do get their lymph nodes removed. Are we able to regrow them? Is that a possibility? And do they also remove lymph nodes during cosmetic surgery? So say someone gets breast implants or like a liposuction. Because I've seen when people go through these cosmetic surgeries that they're puffy too, and they have to go through all this lymph massage as well.
I think that to answer that, I don't think they're supposed to be cutting through it. Again, I might have to research this more. I don't think they're supposed to be cutting through it, but they might, depending on what they have to do on certain cases. I'm not sure. That I won't have an answer to, because I know I have worked on patients after, breast implants, hysterectomies, even post C-sections. And a lot of times I don't know if they just get injured along the process of, something being inside of it and it, ruining it that way. I don't think they're supposed to take it out. From my knowledge, I don't think you're supposed to be taking that out, because I think I would see a lot more women, if they were to take the lymph nodes out during a breast implant, they would have lymphedema. Mm-hmm. And a lot of patients don't. They might be puffy or inflamed, but it's not like true lymphedema. Do you know what I'm saying? Which does occur when the lymph nodes are taken out. Do they grow back? To my understanding, no. But who knows what we can find later on?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Who knows that if that's possible to happen? But again, it's the same thing. Like when they remove an organ, like some people are like, oh yeah, the spleen, let's take the spleen out. It's like the spleen is like the powerhouse of your red blood cells, your white blood cells. Like that's the thing that gets those things stimulated to go out into your body. And so just taking the spleen out, you're going to walk down the street and you're going to have some blood infection, and that's it. You know what I mean? From a stupid cut or something. And then those people have to live on immunosuppressants, right? Which is another crazy aspect, because they have to make sure that they live off of these pills once an organ is taken out of their body, to make sure that they don't get sick, and then their whole body shuts down. And that's because a piece of it was taken out. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And then those pills that they have to take now have side effects, so they're going to be dealing with that in the future. So I fully agree. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why we're removing organs, and this is just so acceptable, as if it doesn't matter. I heard the other day, it's like, oh, we don't need the gallbladder. Okay, well, it stores bile. So when you have your gallbladder removed, how are you going to actually digest fats properly?
You're not.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I do hope that it changes in the future. And then with the pills, since you mentioned that too, I remember Dr. Perry mentioning that he ran through a course of antibiotics, and the way that he actually resolved this, because he was having lingering health issues years after going through the course of antibiotics, was working on the lymph system. So does any of the toxic load that we ingest, whether it be through pharmaceuticals, through preservatives, through dyes, that all just goes to the lymph system? It's like the sewage system?
It is the sewage system. In nicer words, it's like I said, go back to that fish tank analogy. That filtration system is going to keep the whole house running smoothly. And so when it can't work, number one, you're going to have a toxic buildup. And sometimes, though, like again with Dr. Perry's case and a bunch of other people's case, when they have a long course of antibiotics and their good bacteria can't do their job, then the whole lymphatic system is going to be backed up. Then you're going to deal with a whole bunch of other health issues, and because more stuff is going to get backed up. That's why he always states, like, when you try to think of steps to take to work on your lymphatic system, you want to think of, like you said, taking the stuff out first, taking the junk food out, taking the dirty oils out, clean the nutrition up. Number one, just clean up the nutrition. Number two, take out all the other like pills, if you can, that are pharmaceutical grade, or you might be just shoveling supplements down your throat because you bought them off Amazon, but they have all these fillers in it. Like, take that stuff out. Try and get that from whole food. Okay, now, right, you're trying to take something out. Then start working on the other stuff too, which is movement. So walking, start with walking, or jumping on your feet, or the trampoline, or the vibration plate, or anything that's going to get your body to get that pumping mechanism going, right? And then the other one was breathing, right? And you are a big component of this as well. The mouth breathing has to stop, right? Because that means what's going to happen is I'm not going to really have that connection to my diaphragm. And a lot of people, they're like, oh, I'm breathing every day, but I'm not really feeling a difference. I mean, there's other stuff going on, but to that extent, it's like, look, if you are just breathing in and out through your nose, and you're going to automatically have your diaphragm working. So if you're at least doing that, you got the diaphragm moving. And then the other stuff is like your water, right? Making sure you're hydrated. Because what is lymph? Lymph is mainly water. So making sure that you're hydrated. Make sure you're hydrating with the right water. Trace minerals, electrolytes, making sure that that's in there, because that's our body's mechanism. Our cells work off of sodium and potassium, right? So if we have too much water and not enough sodium, the cells are going to be very big and inflated. They're not going to work well either. So we have to have those trace minerals in there. And so I think with taking those small steps, which can be very easy for people to start, you're going to find a difference.
It's going to provide the biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah. And it's simple, right? It shouldn't be overwhelming to say, breathe through your nose, walk, move, jump, do something, diaphragm breathe, water, trace minerals. You start there, you're in a good standing of just pushing that healing process along.
Yeah, I had Greg McLean from Project Airway. He mentioned that the mouth breathing, if you are breathing through your mouth, you pretty much instantly lose access to your diaphragm. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. Well, and you know what? Think about it from I know a crazy, I don't know. Think about it when someone has a trach down their throat, right? Because of surgery. They have the tube down their throat, right? They always have to do, and what's one of the tests that people have to do before they leave the hospital? They have to breathe in that spirometer, right? And people are like, why is that so hard to breathe in the spirometer? Well, because for X amount of hours while you're in surgery, plus, the time that you had to heal, because their mouth's probably irritated after that. So a lot of times they're going to leave their mouth open because it's that feeling of I'm choking, right? So they almost try to keep their mouth open. It's dry. It feels irritable. They don't want to shut it, right? Because the swallowing feels uncomfortable. Well, guess what? They haven't used their diaphragm. And because they were under, they weren't using their diaphragm. So a lot of things after surgery is the primary thing I would say is get yourself to stop mouth breathing and get that diaphragm moving again. You know, that's where people are like, oh, but I had surgery, I'm not allowed to move. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot of other things you can be doing instead right now.
I think it's very difficult to actually heal in like a inpatient surgical setting.
100%.
You don't get sunlight, probably poor water. The food that they give you too is absolute trash.
Yep. And again, like I have patients and friends that are doctors. I have patients and friends that are, you know, in the hospital doing the best they can when it comes to emergency. And I give them a lot of credit. I do, but I just will avoid at all costs my foot and my body ever being in there. I've said to Chris multiple times, I'm like, my leg has to be chopped off and my femoral artery needs to be bleeding before I'm going in there. And even so, maybe just let me go. You know, I know that sounds bad, but like, I'm so petrified. It did nothing. And again, a lot of people, it has saved so many lives. And I can't, like, again, I have friends and patients who save lives every day. But like, for me, I'm just like, no, like I will do everything I can on my end. And I will spend every penny I could on my food at the farm and all my stuff to make sure that I can avoid the best I can of my ass being inside the hospital. It's just where I'm at.
Yeah.
Because I've been there.
It's definitely not a vacation. And Jade had to go in August. That wasn't the most pleasant experience, but it's nice to have for when there is like an actual emergency.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of people, since we do have it, it's like a double-edged sword. A lot of people will not take the preventative methods. They won't take ownership and accountability because we have something to fall back on. So I was actually just thinking this morning, imagine if we didn't have the healthcare system. If we didn't have that, how would you be living your life? I feel like you'd be making a lot different decisions.
Yep. But that's why a lot of our world also focuses on like getting to their primary care to make sure that they have their medication and that CVS fills their prescription so that they make sure that they have their medicine, and then they run rampant if they don't have it. And it's like, yeah, well, that's not how we're supposed to be living. But that's what we've been bred on pretty much here. You know what I mean? And it's so different if you go to other countries. It's not that at all.
Yeah. So getting back to the lymph, I remember I had a client probably when I was first starting out. I didn't really know too much about the lymph system at this point, but she mentioned that she had like swelling under her armpits, and I didn't know what it was at the time, but it seemed scary because there was like a visual bump. So what causes the lymph nodes to actually swell? It did go away. It did subside on its own. But immediately when this happens, especially for a woman, they're thinking breast cancer, as you mentioned before. Right. So why do they swell, and when do you feel like it would be necessary to actually remove them?
It's a good question. I mean, they swell because obviously something got in there, whether it was like a local ingrown hair that got in there, or she had like a open pore in that armpit and some sort of bacteria got in that local one. And then that caused it to get blocked. And then it again, when it goes to the lymph node is like, hey guys, something's not right here. And it makes everything go to that node so it can send off and say, I got to fight it. Right. So that's why that happens. So something had to get into her armpit. And again, there's a lot of open pores in your armpit because we sweat a lot there. Right. So it's easy for bacteria to get in there. So she could have had, like, she might have shaved, or she could have like done something where like something happened and then that bacteria got in there and that one lymph node got swollen. So that could have gotten blocked there. Now, why would you remove it is a good question, because it's always, there have been people that decided, different cancers, that they were not going to get their lymph nodes taken out and they deceased later on. And then there are people that have gotten their lymph nodes taken out and they did survive and had a long, flourishing life. So it's hard to answer that because I feel like it's case by case. And I think that if you are someone that knows that you wouldn't just make sure that every day after that was taken out of you, you're going to live it to the best of your ability, which means living in a healthy environment, taking care of yourself every day and making sure that you supply your immune system with the best things possible, then, you know, you could have a fair chance at being okay. But if not, it's almost likely that I don't want to say you should, but maybe you should get them removed because you know you're not going to take care of yourself. And you might just be that person that needs to rely on medication. So it's like a hard pill to swallow for some people, because I'm like, look, you could look at it one or two ways. You're either going to, and again, me having breast cancer really did change my life in many ways that I didn't think, you know, like from my nutrition to, I mean, you know, a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago, I was diagnosed with lupus, which I still don't think I actually have now that I've cleaned myself out. But that was another, like, you know, immune system reaction where my body's like, hey, F you, you're not treating it right. And as much as I felt like I was healthy, I guess I wasn't, you know what I mean? And I wasn't putting the right things in. And as things change in this world today, I mean, look at cereal today versus what it was, you know, in the 90s. Like, it's filled with more shit. And then see all these people are having, like, it's like one day, but it's the years that build up, right? So if you've had more shit since you were a baby and you continue to have more shit as you get into your 30s, it's not just because you're getting older. That's why all of a sudden you have a reaction to gluten or you have a reaction to all this other stuff. It's because you've had a lot of years of shit build up and a bigger toxic environment in your body, and your lymphatic system doesn't know what to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So how much, you may not be able to answer this, but say for instance, someone is really overweight, how much of that is like actual fat, and how much could be just like excess lymph? How much can we store in the lymph system? How much can it get backed up?
A lot. I mean, have you ever seen people who have had lymphedema?
Mm-hmm.
It's massive. Like, their legs look like they have elephantitis.
Yeah.
So we can get massive from lymph being swollen.
And
but
these people are going to be in a lot of pain.
Oh yeah. Joint pain everywhere, stiffness everywhere, joint pain everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to just complain all over. Like, they're stiff, they're irritable. And again, it's like, well, again, if your joint's not moving, your lymph's not moving, you're not moving. So, I mean, yes, obviously a good chunk of it is going to be fat, but needless to say, I 100% guarantee that their lymphatic system is not working. And they probably have, again, I'm sure if I touch the back of someone's knee, and I have, that is maybe a little bit overweight, they don't take care of themselves, they live a very sedentary lifestyle, the minute I put my thumb into the back of their knee, they're going to fly off the table.
Mm-hmm. Going to be really, really sensitive.
Oh yeah. And again, if I tell you about like all those points, like, they're going to be super sensitive to the touch there.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was going through Dr. Perry's video, Lymphatic Mojo,
Mm-hmm.
I went through the top-down approach too, and I had a guinea pig of mine. And when I was palpating, it's like, especially around the nose,
Yeah.
it's the slightest difference. Like, you got to use the most sensitive of touches, but like, if you take your time within your patient, you will notice a significant difference. It'll feel inflamed. And then even though if you're using a light touch, the person will be like, okay, that actually hurt. So with this in mind, we mentioned pain, joint pain. A lot of what people could be experiencing chronically could actually be due to a lymph issue. So what are some instances? I know there's TMJ, because as soon as I did it on my guinea pig, thank you, by the way, if you listen to this, the TMJ pain that she had for years went away literally within one session. So what are some of the things that people wouldn't attribute to lymph, stagnant lymph, that they probably deal with on a daily basis that could be resolved through more movement and better lymph drainage?
So are you asking, like, hold on, rephrase that for me. So you're asking, like, what I might find commonly myself?
Yeah. Or like,
with patients?
say for instance, someone's dealing with shoulder pain.
Yeah.
and it doesn't move. It's not very mobile. They get the injections and everything like that. Have you ever seen that them just working strictly on lymph has resolved it?
100%. And a lot of times, like, that's the last, now it's not the last thing, but it originally, like, the reason why I went to Dr. Perry and did a lot of his courses were the patients that gave me the most, I don't want to say the most trouble, but it was like, you do everything with them and you're doing everything you can with them. And they say they're doing their part. And it's like, but the pain's not getting better. And it's like, okay, it's enough now. Like, we got to focus our, area somewhere else, right? Instead of just the muscle and the skeletal tissue and the nervous system, we have to look somewhere else. So that's what introduced me to Dr. Perry, which introduced me to the lymphatic system, to say, hey, let's start looking at it this way and let's start attacking it this way. And that's when I started noticing the difference with patients, and patients notice the difference is that they realize, okay, I have a lot more to do on my end to take care of me so that this can go away faster. And so now, depending on the patient who's willing to be open to it, when they've come in and they've said, oh, I've had pain for 20 years and no one's been able to fix me, blah, 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 blah. A lot of times I'm not going over the same stuff that all the other PTs or chiropractors or whatever went through. I'm going to take a different route because I'm going to be like, look, you checked that stuff off the list already. You did that stuff already. Let's talk about some other stuff that might actually, because a lot of people were like, well, I'm just at Wentz and I've done everything. I'm just going to go for the surgery. And I'm like, I don't think you did everything, because they usually didn't. They didn't change their diet. They didn't change their sleeping habits. They didn't change looking at the lymphatic system or the self dry brushing technique. And that's where you're like, okay, let's start with this. And then let's really like talk about whether or not you should be going for surgery or not. So that's been something. And like I told you, I'm starting this Electron Plus stuff, which I'll be excited to dive into more with you at some point when I get my hands dirty with it and I start using it. But the whole, what I'm really excited to do with it is lymphatics, but also to help with, like you said, when people have had surgery and then there's more surgery, there's a lot of scar tissue, because our body is a battery, right? It's plus and negative. And so same with lymph, like it moves based off of our electricity. So as we get older, we tend to lose that battery power if we don't take care of ourselves. So people will have arthritis, people will have pain and tenderness, they'll have joint pain, they'll have this stuff. So that's why everyone's like, well, I just feel like I'm 50 years old. It's like, yeah, but you could be 50 years old and feel amazing if you took care of yourself. So the Electron Plus is the PEMF, but it's guided through my hands. So if I found someone who is very inflamed and their lymphatic system wasn't working, I'm going to actually do those points on them with the machine. So I can actually get that thing to move a little bit deeper from a cellular level, but I'm able to recharge that. So any of their cells that have lacking the battery power, I'm able to bring that back to life a little bit for them. And that's the really cool stuff. Because there's a lot of science on PEMF, like the maps and stuff like that. But I think what's really cool is I'm going to be able to do that through my hands. Yeah.
You're a wizard. You added another weapon to your arsenal.
Yes, I did. It's actually coming tomorrow. So the more I read and the more I learn, utilizing it, I'm excited. But again, that's a lot of the things that get me going. Why I even looked at Electron Plus is because I have patients that they're taking forever to heal, and you're doing all the right things and they've gone and done all this stuff. And you're like, okay, we need to take it at a different level. And you need to really listen to me now. And I've had to kick patients out that it's like, well, if you're not willing to listen, go try another route. And a lot of times they end up back here because they're like, okay, it didn't work. And I'm like, okay, are you willing to do the stuff now? Because it doesn't really need to be so complicated.
Yeah, I know how it is. And your whole needs analysis and how in depth you go with your patients is what really sets you apart. And I'm always amazed whenever you post up. Now I know exactly when your birthday is because you share it with my baby boy. But I'm always amazed because it reminds me that you're actually younger than I am, and you've been through all this. You have all this experience. I'm like, God, what a hustler, honestly. What a badass. What a badass.
I appreciate
story.
that.
Yeah. So hold on one second. I'll edit this out. So stagnant, lymph.
I know you wanted to talk about dry brushing.
Yeah, okay. So we have so some of the techniques that we have is moving, jumping around, getting on like a rebounder. Um, I imagine you trying to tell someone to bring home like a toothbrush to rub it around like Dr. Perry does is not the easiest of sells. So we want to start with top down and with dry brushing. Is it effective the way that most people use it, or are they just doing like a little spot treatment and they really do need to go through the 6 points and top down?
What Dr. Perry has taught is you really have to do the top down approach to get the full effect of it. Because it again, the whole parameter of it is that you're getting it to go back into the lymphatic system. And it's the same concept. Like if you look at the blood supply, you look at your arteries and veins, it's got to go up and through, and then it's got to go back down, and then it's got to clean itself back up, and it's got to go back up and then get cleaned out and then go back into your heart. So you want to do it from the top down. So you start all the way up here, you do all this, and then you start going down, and then you go work your way all the way down to your feet. And everything again is very light. And again, people who are very inflamed they're gonna like touch their skin with the brush, and they're gonna jump, and they're gonna be like, I can't do this. I'm gonna be like, just go lightly, go easy, just a little circle, and just follow those patterns that we go over from that top down approach. And the theory of it is you're getting, from a aesthetic standpoint, you're getting rid of dead skin cells, great. But that also gets the dead cells and that metabolic waste I was talking to you about to get moving throughout the whole system. So that's, again, if a third of the lymph nodes are underneath the skin, you want to work underneath the skin. And that's a great way to do it. And Dr. Perry has taught me this, which is do it before you get in the shower. You know what I mean? Like the easiest part is like you get all the dead skin cells off, you get things flowing, and then you get in the shower. And then it's just like part of your routine. You know what I mean? So, and if anything, if you don't have the time to do your entire body with the dry brush, use a toothbrush and just go over those points we talked about, above and below the collarbone, up into the neck, and then work into your shoulders, work from your belly button, navel into the groin, and then go into the back of the knees, and then get in the shower. That'll maybe be half the amount of time. Because again, you're only spending like 15, 30 seconds in each area, and then you get going. But like I said to you, I can say this 1,000 times. It's just who wants to add it to their routine.
I mean, I know it's like a beauty thing because they have the jade rollers. I've seen those before. Mm-hmm. In my head, you're only focusing on one area. So,
well, in that case, they're really just working on like depuffing their eyes. Usually it's like they roll like underneath here, and you just want to depuff or just depuff the face in general. Mm-hmm. My makeup artist, which is funny, she brings these things and she puts these like cold compresses on under my eyes. I call them slugs, and she laughs every time I call them slugs because I have no anything with makeup to begin with. But I laugh because I'm like, this is great because it really just like it actually depuffs metabolic waste. You know what I mean? And it's just this simple little thing that you just place on your face, and it takes the puffiness out.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of makeup, how would that affect the lymph system? Because you're putting this directly under your skin. I got to imagine like it's absorbing directly in there, and not a lot of women know this.
Yep. Well, it's the same with tattoos, right? Same with tattoos.
Yeah.
You're like, they're going to censor this whole podcast.
Yeah.
Same with tattoos. You know, Chris and I don't have tattoos, but I laugh because Christopher always says when people ask him, like, why don't you have a tattoo? And Chris goes, you don't put a bumper sticker on a Bentley. And I'm like, oh man. But realistically, he doesn't realize that like it is actually really good that he doesn't have it. But anyway, makeup. It's funny because anytime I've had like a photo shoot or anything like that, like I get my makeup done and then it's off. Like that night, that hour, like it's off my face because I do not like the feeling of it being on me, like at all. I really don't. And as I've gotten healthier, I have had to take care of my skin less. Now I do go see my esthetician so she can get all my dead skin cells off and get me depuffed and stuff like that. But I attribute, and I have pictures of how cystic my acne used to be. I think you probably even remember how my skin used to be when you first met me. I'm sorry, the sun. And like cleaning myself, just my nutrition cleared my face up.
I tried explaining that to a teen the other day that is like caking makeup on, and obviously they're
Oof.
self-conscious, they're in high school, so
Right. I did it too. I mean, I did it. We all did it. But the problem is what they're putting in a lot of this makeup too. Now, there are products out there that are animal based, and like a lot of stuff I put on now has like beef tallow in it and stuff like that. So if I do put something on, it's very, I mean, and I spend a pretty penny on it, but I make sure that it has all wholesome stuff in it. You know, it's dyed with beets, you know, for my lipstick and stuff like that. So, you know, yes, when I use my makeup artist, you know, she uses what she uses, but like I literally that night it's on and then it's off because and especially women that like sleep with their makeup on, I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's like the worst thing for you. And that's, I mean, a lot of people, I get it. Like they want to look a certain way, especially in the gym. That's another thing. You put that makeup on and you're sweating, like that stuff's just going inside of you. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So it's not great to just cake on makeup every day and just keep putting it in and keep putting it in. But that's why you want to be aware of the skin products you use too. You know, if you're just, or the products you use for your deodorant or the products you use for your hair, if you're just putting toxic stuff that your pores are wide open. So that, and again, I told you this is what my whole lupus thing kind of woke me up to was I went really crunchy and I just flipped the house upside down. And honestly, it was the best thing for the both of us.
Mhm.
Now I would say we're like 95%, maybe 90% to put together because we do go out on a Friday or Saturday night, but like I also don't eat like shit the most that I can. But regardless, everything else that I have throughout my days, my household, my cleaning products, everything is clean. And that I think has helped me stay away from cancer and any of this quote unquote lupus flare ups that they diagnosed me with.
Yep. It can be daunting, like once you actually wake up to the fact that pretty much everything is toxic in your environment. So if you're dealing with a skin issue, it's usually, I would say 99% of the time, it's due to an internal problem. So now you just cake on some stuff or you put some ointment on it. It may go away temporarily, but it's going to come back probably even stronger because you didn't actually deal with the root cause of the issue. So I'm glad that
Right.
that you notice a big difference with your skin. You don't need nearly as much makeup.
I have nothing on. I have nothing on my face.
We see it. We see you. We
And
see.
that's where I'm like, you know, and it's crazy. Like if you just give your body what it needs, and like Dr. Perry always says, it's very simple. It's just simple. You give it the good nutrition, you give it hydration, you give it your trace minerals, you start moving more, you start breathing properly, you're going to take probably 90% of your issues away. Then the rest is all good additive stuff that you can keep putting in and learning about. But that's where it's like you start working on that. And same when you talk about skin, think about psoriasis or eczema. All my patients that have come in and done that, I'm like, what are you doing all day? Well, I drink beer like 4 or 5 days a week. I'm like, cut it out. Just even cutting it down to 1 time a week. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be like, you know, Miss Perfect because I'm not, but you cut that from having 4 beers a night, 6 days a week down to 1 night out of the week. I bet you your eczema goes down. And sure as hell.
I mean, that happened for me. I noticed that whenever I would drink beer, I thought I had celiacs at the time. I mean, you mentioned leaky gut earlier. That I'm gonna have to do like a whole podcast on, whether it's the gluten, whether it's the glyphosate that they're spraying on the wheat that we cultivate here in America. But I noticed as soon as I stopped drinking beer, as soon as I stopped drinking or eating any wheat products, my
Yep.
eczema went away. My dry skin around my nose went away.
Nose.
So.
Yeah.
So last question that I have for you, say someone does implement the dry brushing in their routine, would you follow that up with some diaphragmatic breathing? Would you have any type of technique in specific that you would recommend for that if you did? Because I think Dr.
There's so
Perry
many.
is.
Say it again.
Because I think Dr. Perry did at the end of his Lymph Mojo class.
Yeah, he does. He does. And it makes sense because that's what he believes in too. Like, you get it moving and then you breathe. And because that diaphragm is the biggest pumping mechanism, right? So if you get everything moving and you get the waist moving, you want to follow that up with breathing, because that diaphragm is going to be the biggest pump to get now that whole system to go back out, go back in, and do that whole thing. And it can be as simple as just making sure you're taking a couple deep breaths all through your nose. You're in your shower, you're rinsing off. You just sit under that water, and you can even make it a cold shower. Even better. Get in the cold shower and just inhale, like you said, almost like I would say even 4 seconds. You're starting off, inhale, exhale as deep as you can for 7 seconds, maybe even longer if you can through the nose. Do that for 30 seconds, and then on with your day that you go.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the cold. I was actually wondering the other day if that's one of the main effects of it, is because it's like you get this constriction. So it's almost like you're wringing your body out when you jump in the cold. So everything contracts. Your circulatory system is pretty much parallel with your lymph system.
Yep.
So you get that squeeze and you're pretty much wringing out all the shit.
All of it. All of it. And again, think about your pores we talk about, right? Because your lymph is underneath the skin too. So you get that thing moving with the dry brushing, you're taking your deep breaths, you got the cold shower going. Now all of a sudden you're getting a whole nice like reset of your lymphatic system, and now you're starting your day. Like if that was a way most people could start their day, that would be fantastic.
I agree. It's always the simple stuff. So
yep. And that's what he says. He says, make it simple.
Keep it simple, stupid.
That's it.
So if you've been struggling with either weight loss or you've had some chronic issue, it may help to look at the lymph system. Hopefully this helps and maybe it resonates with you if you're listening to this. Maybe you need a low and slow approach and you don't need to go balls to the wall. You need something a little bit more sensitive. You need to tone things down. I would imagine this would be true for someone that's like type A and super go driven. It's like, just chill out, take things slow, listen to your body, and take a different approach if something hasn't been working. But I love that you mentioned don't be so quick to cut open your body for something. There's probably something else out there that you haven't tried before. So Dr. Marron, thank you so much for joining me with this.
It's a pleasure.
Always a pleasure talking with you.